Book 2, the Book of the Traveller of the Worlds, Canto 7, The Descent into Night. A mind absolved from life, made calm to know, a heart divorced from the blindness and the pang, the seal of tears, the bond of ignorance, he turned to find that wide world failure's cause. So this is a description of Ashwapati's mind after he leaves the kingdom and godheads of the greater life. The last few lines, as you see in that canto, all seems in vain, yet endless is the game. Impassive turns a ever-circling wheel. Life has no issue, death brings no release. A prisoner of itself, the being lives and keeps its futile immortality. Extinction is denied its sole escape. An error of the gods has made the world. Or, indifferent, the eternal watches time. So that was end of Canto 6. And then Canto 7, The Descent into Night, begins with Ashwapati's mind and heart. A mind absolved from life, made calm to know, a heart divorced from the blindness and the pang, the seal of tears, the bond of ignorance, he turned to find that wide world failure's cause. Away he looked from nature's visible face, and sent his gaze into the viewless vast, the formidable unknown infinity, asleep behind the endless coil of things that carries the universe in its timeless breaths, and the ripples of its being are our lives. So he sent his gaze into the viewless vast, which is the formidable unknown infinity, asleep, that carries the universe in its timeless breaths, and the ripples of its being are our lives. The worlds are built by its unconscious breath, and matter and mind are its figures or its powers, and our waking thoughts the output of its dreams. The veil was rent that covers nature's depths. So the veil was rent, the veil was removed that covers nature's depths. And removed for whom? For Ashwapati. He could see behind. And what does he see? Here is the description. He saw the fount of the world's lasting pain, and the mouth of the black pit of ignorance. The evil guarded at the roots of life raised up its head and looked into his eyes on a dim bank where dies subjective space, from a stark ridge overlooking all that is, a tenebrous awakened nescience, her wide blank eyes, wondering at time and form, stared at the inventions of the living void, and the abyss whence our beginnings rose. Behind appeared a grey carved mask of night, watching the birth of all created things. So this is what he sees, the world's lasting, the fountain of why the world's lasting pain, and the mouth of the black pit of ignorance and the evil guarded at the roots of life. And behind appeared a grey carved mask of night, watching the birth of all created things. A hidden puissance, conscious of its force. A vague and lurking presence everywhere. A contrary doom that threatens all things made. A death, figuring as the dark seed of life, seemed to engender and to slay the world. So both engender means to create, to give birth to, and to slay and to destroy the world. Then from the sombre mystery of the gulfs, and from the hollow bosom of the mask, something crept forth that seemed a shapeless thought, a fatal influence upon creatures stole, whose lethal touch pursued the immortal spirit. On life was laid the haunting finger of death, and overcast with error, grief, and pain, the soul's native will for truth and joy and light. A deformation coiled that claimed to be the being's very turn, nature's true drive. A hostile and perverting mind at work in every corner, ensconced of conscious life, corrupted truth with her own formulas, interceptor of the listening of the soul, afflicting knowledge with the hue of doubt. It captured the oracles of the occult gods, effaced the signposts of life's pilgrimage, cancelled the firm rock edicts graved by time, and on the foundations of the cosmic law erected its bronze pylons of misrule. So this hostile, perverting mind with a capital M, at work in every corner, corrupted truth with her formulas, intercepted the listening of the soul, afflicted knowledge with doubt, captured the oracles of the occult gods, effaced the signposts of life's pilgrimage, and cancelled the firm rock edicts graved by time on the foundations of the cosmic law, erected its bronze pylons of misrule. What does bronze pylons refer to? Pylons, anyone can see? So I think it has a reference to, the pylons of serpent to the snake, but you can check what exactly it means. Erected its bronze pylons of misrule. Huh?
Tower-like structure for carrying electricity cables high above.
Yeah, electricity?
Cables high above.
High above the ground.
That's tower-like structure.
Yeah, so pylons of misrule, okay. Erected its bronze pylons of misrule, okay. So, even light and love, by that cloaked danger's spell, turned from the brilliant nature of the gods to fallen angels and misleading sons, became themselves a danger and a charm, a perverse sweetness, heaven-born malefice. Its power could deform divinest things. So these bronze pylons, bronze pylons. Well, bronze, I suppose, he uses that. Bronze pylons of mystery, rule of these, large, tall, cable-like structures. Even light and love, by that cloaked danger spell, turned from the brilliant nature of the gods to fallen angels and misleading sons, became themselves a danger and a charm, a perverse sweetness, a heaven-born malefice. Its power could deform divinest things. Whose power? Mind, that perverting mind, the hostile and perverting mind at work in every corner of conscious life. So, you see, he goes into the descent into night, and first thing he sees there is grey mask, this vague and lurking presence, which he realizes is death, a death figuring as the dark seed of life and so on. And then he sees mind as the progeny, or whatever you want to call it.
That he calls it a fatal influence with a capital I. So when he sees the mask, behind the mask, he's 35, line 35. He sees a fatal influence upon creatures too.
Yeah.
So basically it's the influence of the darkness, right?
The fatal influence upon creatures stole, whose lethal touch pursued the immortal. Who is this fatal influence? Death. Darkness. The ignorance. Yeah.
Ignorance
Same thing.
On our mind. The influence.
No. Mind itself is perverted here. Mind itself is not on our mind. It's mind with a capital M. It's the origin of mind. So mind itself is an instrument that has to change. Mind is open to ignorance. It's, what should I say? In these planes, mind is very nature perverting, and therefore human mind or mind in the universe or on earth has those perversions. And therefore the world is as it is today and not immortalized or supramental. So this is not the mind that you're looking at. When you say our mind, you have to understand this is the origin of mind. And that is what he's trying to explore here. Otherwise, there was no need to do yoga. If mind itself was pure, that means our mind would have also been absolutely pure. But it's not. It comes from this plane of consciousness. And he has gone into the origin of mind, where the fount is. Yeah, the fount. And mind, in that sense, is linked to this ignorance. Mind is a product of the nescience. And therefore, even though it becomes more conscious in life and tries to gain more, it becomes half conscious. And it then becomes, over time, as we read, you'll see. But its very origin, the fount is here. And that is why the change of mind, if human beings have to evolve, mind has to evolve. Otherwise, mind would not need to evolve. So, then from the somber mystery of the gulfs and from the hollow bosom of the mask, please note, from the hollow bosom of the mask is the mask of ignorance, of inconscience, of death, whatever name you want to give it. Something crept forth that seemed a shapeless thought, a fatal influence upon creatures stole, whose lethal touch pursued the immortal spirit. On life was laid the haunting finger of death. So what was laid on life? This fatal influence was the haunting finger of death that was laid on life, and overcast with error, grief and pain, the soul's native will for truth and joy and light. So the soul's native will was overcast with error, grief and pain by this haunting finger of death, which was the fatal influence which stole upon creatures, which is the earth, human beings, all creatures, in fact, not just human, on the earth. So, a deformation coiled, or maybe even outside the earth, I don't know, just as creatures here. So we don't have to presume that creatures only means human creatures. So, a deformation coiled that claimed to be the being's very turn, nature's true drive, a hostile and perverting mind at work. So this shapeless thought that came from this bosom of the mask and was a fatal influence upon creatures, then the being's very turn, nature's true drive, a hostile and perverting mind at work in every corner, ensconed of conscious life. Every corner of life was permeated by this hostile and perverting mind at work. And what did it do? What was its special work? It corrupted truth with her own formulas. Interceptor of the listening of the soul, afflicting knowledge with the hue of doubt. So you see the very nature of mind, even our own mind, the nature of mind proper, M with a capital, it always brings in doubt. So what does the whole of Mother and Sri Aurobindo's yoga talk about? As essential for yogic transformation is faith, opposite of doubt. Surrender, faith, just the opposite of all these things that he's talking about. Calmness, equanimity, exactly the opposite. So, please note the nature of mind that is being, and that is why be careful when you start doubting. Doubting the divine, doubting yourself, doubting life, doubting the purpose of your life. Because doubt is a hostile agent that comes from this particular sphere. So please note the words, how he's using them. a deformation coiled that claimed to be the being's very turn, nature's true drive, this deformation coiled, that claimed to be the being's very turn. A hostile and perverting mind at work, in every corner, ensconced of conscious life, corrupted truth with her own formulas, interceptor of the listening of the soul, afflicting knowledge with the hue of doubt. It captured the oracles of the occult gods, effaced the signposts of life's pilgrimage, cancelled the firm rock edicts graved by time, and on the foundations of the cosmic law, erected its bronze pylons of misrule. Even light and love, by that cloaked danger spell, turned from the brilliant nature of the gods to fallen angels and misleading suns, became themselves a danger and a charm, a perverse sweetness, heaven-born malefice. Its power could deform divinest things. A wind of sorrow breathed upon the world. Now the world, name the world comes. The wind of sorrow breathed upon the world. All thought with falsehood was besieged. All thought. That means all the thinking, the process of thought, mind, was all thought with falsehood was besieged. So when you look at the layers of the mind, when you study Sri Aurobindo's, planes of mind, you will see that he puts very low down on the pyramid the thinking mind, the vital mind, the mental mind, the physical mind. And then he goes on to the illumined mind. Then he goes on to intuition. Then he goes on to the overmind. Then he goes on to or even before that, higher mind is before intuition. And so on. So you see the 12 gradations of mind and where we are. So that is a very important thing to understand. Why he took that trouble to create that. For you to understand that thinking mind is actually by its nature corrupt. It is corrupted by this perverse influence of ignorance and death. And the perversity it traps the soul through the agency of doubt and fear and all the things that we've read here. The 3 things he specifically mentions: error, grief, and pain. So, and the agency is doubt. So if you notice this, then what is it that when we are at our higher consciousness levels, what happens to us? We stop thinking, if you notice. Some sort of inner illumination, intuition, calmness enters the being. A deeper truth then emerges from the truth, from the soul, from the inner being. And that begins to guide the life. Now, when that state becomes normal, like what Mother and Sri Aurobindo often call the quiet mind or the silent mind, why is it so important to quieten the mind down and silence it? If the mind is a great instrument of light, and if it is such a great instrument at all, because it is not, and that's very important to understand. And therefore, when you read a canto like this, the descent into night, and you see the origins of mind, the origins of the world and the fount, you begin to get a clear, your mind itself, which is your only way of understanding right now, begins to become clarified, and something of the intuitive mind, which knows already, awakens in the being, but you need to trust it. So here the mind that he's talking about is the thinking mind, or the mind, what you call the thought. But there are other levels of mind that are deeper and higher. That's why we study the planes of mind. Those levels of mind know the truth. And you will see that comes forth later in the canto. So, even light and love, by that cloaked danger spell, turn from the brilliant nature of the gods to fallen angels and misleading suns, became themselves a danger and a charm, so on. All thought with falsehood was besieged, all act stamped with defect, or with frustration's sign. All high attempt with failure or vain success. None could know the reason of his fall. The grey mask whispered, and though no sound was heard, yet in the ignorant heart a seed was sown that bore black fruit of suffering, death and bale. Out of the chill steps of a bleak unseen, invisible, wearing the night's grey mask, arrived the shadowy, dreadful messengers, invaders from a dangerous world of power, ambassadors of evil's absolute. So notice how this happens. A wind of sorrow breathed upon the world. When sorrow breathes upon the world, it is the influence of night and death and darkness. It is the perverse sweetness. It is that has entered into the world, into the earth. All thought with falsehood was besieged. All action, stamped with defect or with frustration sign. All high attempt with failure or vain success. But none could know the reason of his fall. The grey mask whispered, and though no sound was heard, yet in the ignorant heart a seed was sown. So the grey mask of death whispered, and though no sound was heard, yet in the ignorant heart a seed was sown that bore black fruit of suffering, death and bale. Out of the chill steps of a bleak unseen, invisible, wearing the night's grey mask, arrived the shadowy, dreadful messengers, invaders from a dangerous world of power, ambassadors of evil's absolute. In silence, the inaudible voices spoke. Hands that none saw planted the fatal grain. No form was seen, yet a dire work was done. So hands that none saw planted the fatal grain, the seed. No form was seen, yet a dire work was done on earth. Iron decree. The iron, iron gates. So the iron is, I think, something that perishes, that tarnishes, that loses its luster. An iron decree in crooked uncials written. What does that mean? This is a new word. Cials. Uncials. Like a fault, yeah. An iron decree in crooked uncials written imposed a law of sin and adverse fate.
An iron decree is also called like a hard, because iron is so hard.
Yeah.
It's like a hard law.
Yeah. So the iron decree, also often in literature and all, iron is used to symbolize the iron law of death. It's always associated with the darker movements. Gold is associated with the higher movements. So an iron decree in crooked uncials written imposed a law of sin and adverse fate. Life looked at him with changed and somber eyes. So life looked at him. The principle of life looked at him with changed and somber eyes. Her beauty he saw, and the yearning heart in things, that with a little happiness is content, answering to a small ray of truth or love. He saw her gold sunlight and her far blue sky, her green of leaves and hue and scent of flowers, and the charm of children, and the love of friends, and the beauty of women, and kindly hearts of men. But saw too the dreadful powers that drive her moods, and the anguish she has strewn upon her ways, fate waiting on the unseen steps of men, and her evil and sorrow, and last gift of death. a breath of disillusion and decadence, corrupting watched for life's maturity, and made to rot the full grain of the soul. So, life looked at him, at Ashwapati, with changed and somber eyes. And then he saw the beauty, the wonderful, the nature and heart of life, a green of leaves and hue and scent of flowers, the beauty of women and so on. But saw too the dreadful powers that drive our moods, because these dreadful powers had entered into earth through the agency of night, the agency of death, the grey mask of death, through the agency of mind, the corrupting mind, and doubt and suffering and error and grief. So he saw both, but saw too the dreadful powers that drive her moods and the anguish she has strewn upon her ways, fate waiting on the unseen steps of men, and her evil and sorrow and last gift of death, and last gift of death of life. But this life itself is not corrupt. It is the corrupting influence, that fatal influence that has entered into life that corrupts it. So, a breath of disillusion and decadence, corrupting watched for life's maturity, and made to rot the full grain of the soul. Progress became a purveyor of death. Progress itself became a purveyor of death. Do you understand what that means? Purveyor, like what are those things that take you forward and hand you to death? So, progress became a purveyor of death, a world that clung to the law of a slain light, cherished the putrid corpses of dead truths, hailed twisted forms as things free, new and true, beauty from ugliness, and evil drank, feeling themselves guests at a banquet of the gods, and tasted corruption like a high-spiced food. A darkness settled on the heavy air. It hunted the bright smile from nature's lips and slew the native confidence in her heart and put fear's crooked look into her eyes. The lust that warps the spirit's natural good, replaced by a manufactured virtue and vice, the frank spontaneous impulse of the soul, afflicting nature with the dual's lie, their twin values whetted a forbidden zest, made evil a relief from spurious good. The ego battened on righteousness and sin, and each became an instrument of hell, both righteousness and sin. The ego battened on righteousness and sin, and each became an instrument of hell. In rejected heaps, by a monotonous road, the old simple delights were left to lie on the wasteland of life's descent to night. So in rejected heaps, by a monotonous road, the old simple delights were left to lie on the wasteland of life's descent to night. All glory of life was dimmed, tarnished with doubt. All beauty ended in an aging face. All power was dubbed a tyranny cursed by God, and truth a fiction needed by the mind. The chase of joy was now a tired hunt. All knowledge was left a questioning ignorance. So it's very interesting to see how everything is tainted, is permeated by this somber, power of death, of ignorance, of nescience, of suffering, of doubt. Even what we consider as good, even what we consider as virtue, even what we consider, all of those things, put fear's crooked look into our eyes, the lust that wraps the spirit's natural good, replaced by a manufactured virtue and vice, and so on. Made evil a relief from spurious good. So even good is spurious. The ego battened on righteousness and sin, and each became an instrument of hell. And you can see all these examples if you look at the history of earth. Look at what the church has done. Look at what religion has done. Or look at what, virtue has done as much damage as sin and so-called, righteousness.
Righteousness and sin, yes.
Is put together. So, and absolutely true, because the more righteous you become, actually the more sinful you are. Virtue, you lose that humility and that sense of feeling that you are not so, absolute. And, I see often the most righteous people, they are, witch hunt others as though they are completely above all kind of error. And actually, in the end, they become worse than the perpetrators of sin. Much worse and much darker. And therefore, nowadays, these judgments that comes in such great black and white of things and, how people damn. It's so easy to, this herd mentality to get together and damn things. So absolutely itself is a real darkness which one should be wary of, not join into and be aware of its great error and great power to destroy and to actually, through the opposite, do exactly worse than sin would have done. And there's so many aphorisms of Sri Aurobindo where he writes about virtue and its terrifying evil.
We see this Julius Caesar with Shakespeare. 5 people are killing Julius Caesar, but each for a different reason. Brutus has a hard reason, whereas that Rome will be republic and somebody is killing just for selfish.
Yeah, so who is the worst? Is it Julius Caesar or the perpetrators of his? So really, these are very important questions of morality which make you always step back, not to be so quick to judge, to condemn others, and to quickly join the bandwagon of so-called virtuous, and keep watching yourself and see where it is, like Mother says. She says, if you want peace in the world, the only way is to keep peace in your heart. If you want non-violence in the world, be non-violent. But how violent are we in my thoughts? When I think about myself, I think, oh, if that person goes and hurts this animal, I'm going to kill him. Where is this violence coming from? So how violent is our thoughts? If our violence is not removed from our thoughts, how do we expect the world to be removed of violence? And we're so easy to judge, oh, look at the war, how insane. But look at the violence we ourselves carry in ourselves every day, in our thoughts, in our feelings, against others, about others, So these are things which can keep us sane on the path and not become self-righteous and moralistic and virtuous. There's a great danger in that, sometimes worse. So, as from a womb obscure, he saw emerge the body and visage of a dark unseen, hidden behind the fair outsides of life. So, of course, as you know, this is Ashwapati's description of when he enters into the, into the ignorance, into the descent, into night, which is obviously his experience of nihil, of death, of the inconscience. And, of course, the nature of life that is so permeated by death that even, death waits for life's maturity and then strikes and so on. So, as from a womb obscure, he is Ashwapati, saw emerge the body and visage of a dark unseen, hidden behind the fair outsides of life. Its dangerous commerce is our suffering's cause. Its breath is a subtle poison in men's hearts. All evil starts from that ambiguous face. Or a peril haunted now the common air. The world grew full of menacing energies, and wherever turned for help or hope, his eyes, in field and house, in street and camp and mart, he met the prowl and stealthy come and go of armed, disquieting, bodied influences. A march of goddess figures, dark and nude, alarmed the air with grandiose unease. Appalling footsteps drew, invisibly near. Shapes that were threats invaded the dreamlight, and ominous beings passed him on the road, whose very gaze was a calamity. A charm and sweetness sudden and formidable, faces that raised alluring lips and eyes, approached him armed with beauty like a snare, but hid a fatal meaning in each line, and could in a moment dangerously change. So he sees from, hidden behind the fair outsides of life, this body and visage of a dark unseen. And this is, of course, the experience he has when he sees that. The world grew full of menacing energies, and everything behind everything, this charm and sweetness, they were suddenly changed would change dangerously their shape. Approached him armed with beauty like a snare, but hid a fatal meaning in each line, and could in a moment dangerously change. But he alone discerned that screened attack. So obviously this attack was not visible to the outer eye, to the mind, to the life. It was only he alone discerned that screened attack. You had to have the inner vision, the psychic absolutely in front, the soul alive to see this. But he alone discerned that screened attack. A veil upon the inner vision lay. A force was there that hid its dreadful steps. All was belied, yet thought itself the truth. All were beset, but knew not of the siege, for none could see the authors of their fall. Aware of some dark wisdom, still withheld, that was the seal and warrant of this strength, he followed the track of dim, tremendous steps, returning to the night from which they came. A tract he reached unbuilt and owned by none. There all could enter, but none stay for long. It was a no man's land of evil air, a crowded neighborhood without one home, a borderland between the world and hell. There unreality was nature's lord. It was a space where nothing could be true, for nothing was what it had claimed to be. A high appearance wrapped a spacious void, yet nothing could confess its own pretense, even to itself in the ambiguous heart. A vast deception was the law of things. Only by that deception they could live. An unsubstantial nihil guaranteed the falsehood of the forms this nature took, and made them seem a while to be and live. A borrowed magic drew them from the void. They took a shape and stuff that was not theirs, and showed a color that they could not keep. Mirrors to a phantasm of reality, each rainbow brilliance was a splendid lie, a beauty unreal graced, a glamour face. Nothing could be relied on to remain. Joy nurtured tears, and good and evil proved. But never out of evil one plucked good. Love ended early in hate, delight killed with pain. Truth into falsity grew, and death ruled life. a power that laughed at the mischiefs of the world, an irony that joined the world's contraries, and flung them into each other's arms to strive, put a sardonic rictus on God's face. So here, in this plane of the descent of night, in this plane of death and of the inconscience, Ashwapati discovers the true nature that is hidden to the outer view and mind of humanity and of most of us, because it is camouflaged, the hidden reality behind life, and how death is on constantly. These powers are waiting to ambush and to lay siege. A vast deception was a law of things. Only by the deception they could live. An unsubstantial nihil guaranteed the falsehood of the forms. This nature took and made them seem a while to be and live. So and so on, So he enters into this no man's land of evil air. And this is at the root of, from where our world, this root of evil, this root of death, this root of night, is what actually these powers come from this plane and take siege and hold the world, hold the earth, hold those who are, and try and capture this earth. And how they work and how they wait, all of this is described here. Joy nurtured tears, and good and evil proved, but never out of evil one plucked good. Love ended early in hate, delight killed with pain. Truth into falsity grew, and death ruled life. A power that laughed at the mischiefs of the world, an irony that joined the world's contraries, and flung them into each other's arms to strive, put a sardonic rictus on God's face. What does rictus mean? Sorry? Evil smile. Yeah. Sarcastic smile on God's face. Aloof. Its influence entered everywhere and left a cloven hoof mark on the breast. You see, the devil's mark. It's called a cloven hoof mark on the breast, a twisted heart, and a strange somber smile, mocked at the sinister comedy of life, announcing the advent of a perilous form. An ominous tread softened its dire footfall, that none might understand or be on guard. None heard until a dreadful grasp was close. So this influence, this dark, sinister influence, left a cloven hoof mark on the breast of life, and it nobody could see it, announcing the advent of a perilous form. An ominous tread softened its dire footfall, that none might understand or be on guard. None heard until a dreadful grasp was close, or else all augured a divine approach. An air of prophecy felt, a heavenly hope, listened for a gospel, watched for a new star. It was just the opposite. Or else one was waiting for something, some great prophecy and heavenly hope. Listened for a gospel, watched for a new star. The fiend was visible, but cloaked in light. The fiend was visible, but cloaked in light. He seemed a helping angel from the skies. He armed untruth with scripture and the law. He deceived with wisdom, with virtue slew the soul. This is a much more dangerous kind of attack. It's very easy to recognize someone when they are truly in the form of evil and doing evil. But here is the form of good, the form of virtue that is actually at the very heart of this very sinister force. And that is when it takes you by surprise, and you do not, in fact, you think it's some, great being that's come to help you and to take you to the next level, but it's the opposite. Now, you see even in the world on a lesser scale how gullible men are. They get taken in by all these godmen and charlatans that put on the garb and the robe of virtue and so on. So at a much larger level, this is being played out in the universe. So, or else all augured a divine approach, an air of prophecy felt a heavenly hope, listened for a gospel, watched for a new star. The fiend was visible but cloaked in light. There's much more difficult then to find the fiend than when it is cloaked in light and virtue. Much easier to find it when it's cloaked in darkness. He seemed a helping angel from the skies. He armed untruth with scripture and the law. He deceived with wisdom, with virtue slew the soul, and led to perdition by the heavenward path. A lavish sense he gave of power and joy. And when arose the warning from within, he reassured the ear with dulcet tones, or took the mind captive in its own net. So, this is the way that the Asuric forces work. Often the worst ones are the ones that are cloaked in light and come in the guise of the savior or the one of redemption. And then when something within our heart, because we have a soul, so something warns us that we are going down the wrong path, it camouflages that, you see. His rigorous logic made the false seem true, amazing the elect with holy law. He spoke as with the very voice of God. The air was full of treachery and ruse. Truth speaking was a stratagem in that place. Ambush lurked, in a smile and peril made. Safety its cover, trust its entry's gate. Falsehood came laughing with the eyes of truth. Each friend might turn an enemy or a spy. The hand one clasped ensleeved a dagger's stab, and an embrace could be doom's iron cage. What is a doom's iron cage? Death. The iron cage of doom is death. So, you see, there is a warning that each of us gets. If we don't pay attention and continue down this path, that is what Ashwapati is seeing. The fiend is waiting to clasp us. It will find, the mother has written about the tempters, the three, what are they called? Those who come to test us. There's a whole passage on it. And then also you can see that when one is trying to climb higher in one's own consciousness, it is through virtue that this fiend comes. It's not through the evil. It actually comes through light. And that is why we are unaware of it, and it catches you and it seizes you. And that is how it works. So you have to be not only careful of it in the world when you see the movements and you see how the world moves, but also you have to be careful that you yourself in your individual life don't get entrapped in it. Right. Agony and danger stalked their trembling prey and softly spoke as to a timid friend. Attack sprang suddenly, vehement and unseen. Fear leaped upon the heart at every turn and cried out with an anguished, dreadful voice. It called for one to save, but none came near. All warily walked, for death was ever close. Yet caution seemed a vain expense of care, for all that guarded proved a deadly net. And when after long suspense salvation came and brought a glad relief disarming strength, it served as a smiling passage to worse fate. So, see, there are these planes of consciousness that one can experience even in sleep. They're very, very dangerous. And when you go there in these planes, you can get stuck. And there you are pursued. You go from one level of danger to another, and that attack is very perilous. So, it is good to know these things so that when you face them or when you see them, you can recognize them. It served as a smiling passage to worse fate. One sees a lot of films that are made on these themes, And where do these films come from? If you really look deeper into it, they come from these planes, and a lot of us are in touch with these planes. And the films are very perilous because they open our own consciousness to these planes and these beings. And therefore one has to be very strong and very centered to be able to see such films. The mother was very, very clear that she did not want us to see these kinds of films. She was very careful. She said, be careful of what you expose your consciousness to, because you're not strong enough as yet to be able to bear the evil and wickedness of this world and the influences that can come through these mediums. So even when we watch films, or our children watch films, or people we know, it's very easy to say, we're just watching a film, it's just a film. It's not. These are powers and realities. And when we open ourselves, you see how we sleep at night and what happens to our own mind when you read news items, when you see films. And therefore, the best thing to do is to shut it off, because what you're really doing is you are shutting off a particular influence from coming into your being. And it is important to know where to draw the line and to be conscious of oneself and be aware of one's weaknesses and be aware of how much one has to progress. So these are things that, you would shut the door to anything unpleasant. This is shutting the door to those unpleasant forces. And they are very dire. They enter in. You see these young children who commit suicide on Facebook and on internet, and these terrible games that are played. And they all get involved in this it's called the dark web, dark reality. And this has become so strong in the world that, and the reason that is happening is because there is no sense of discrimination. And one doesn't realize the pernicious influence of these kinds of forces that enter through these mediums and through these objects and through these, means, electronic means. We think it's something very, simple. So, it served as a smiling passage to worse fate. There was no truce and no safe place to rest. One dared not slumber or put off one's arms. It was a world of battle and surprise. All who were there lived for themselves alone. All warred against all, but with a common hate, turned on the mind that sought some higher good. So all warred upon all, but with a common hate, turned on the mind that sought some higher good. Truth was exiled, lest she should dare to speak, and hurt the heart of darkness with her light, or bring her pride of knowledge to blaspheme the settled anarchy of established things. Then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core. Altering its form, the life remained the same. The capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live in their own way for their own selves, or to enforce a common lie and wrong. There ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven, to truth and God, injustice justified by firm decrees, sovereign weights of errors legalized trade. So all of this, you see all these Marvel films you see now, quite a few of the children see them, the new films that are being made. Then the scene changed but kept its dreadful core. It's almost like, so these are real planes, they exist. There are people trapped in these planes, and there are whole beings that inhabit these planes. And therefore these films that you see of Captain Marvel and the evil something or whatever they're called, quite a few of these series, are not so far off the truth. There are all these kingdoms and planes that you go to, and all these lords and beings that sit there, and the whole thing that happens, the war between truth and evil and light and darkness, and so on. So, founded upon a soil that knew not light, there each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil paths, to live in their own way for their own selves. Ends that place. Then again, as Ashwati continues to travel in this plane of night, then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core. Altering its form, the life remained the same. So the outer form changed, but life remained the same, and the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core. A capital was there. Now this is the next movement he sees in this same plane. A capital was there without a state. So, without a ruler. So a capital without a state means what? Why does he mention this particular word? A capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. So there was the central for inhabiting, the ego was the lord there. Falsehood was its mate. Sorry?
Capital was there without a state.
Vatican City. Well, that certainly has there are a lot of these, that you can see for yourself how it plays out. But these are actually inner worlds of consciousness, planes that you can visit, and they actually exist. And then, of course, their forces impact and the world and the earth and society and peoples. So, a capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There, each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths. The only difference or agreement to differ was in which path of evil to take. There each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live in their own way, for their own selves, or to enforce a common lie and wrong. There ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. So in this plane, where in this next scene that Ashwapati witnesses, ego is the lord sitting on the peacock seat, and falsehood is his queen and mate. The world turned to them, ego and falsehood, as heaven to truth and God. Injustice justified by firm decrees. The sovereign weights of errors legalized trade, but all the weights were false and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and a sword, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. So, in a sense, these worlds have a great influence on our earth. We think they don't just exist there as typal worlds. You all have read recently about Alexei Navalny's various court proceedings and how the Kremlin has been, dispensing so-called justice to its all prisoners. I mean, if you read those accounts, there's exactly this. There's no difference. You can just a watered-down version of exactly what Ashwapati is seeing and describing here. Because the judge is totally already biased. He rules a sentence and gives a punishment without any relation to truth or to justice or to what has actually happened. So people's sentences are from 3 years or 1 year have suddenly gone up to 20 years for some misdemeanor which only they know what it is. And nobody is allowed to live like a human being. Now, you see, we think that this is just poetry or it is just something that takes place in a wonderful book. And we all sit here very happy reading all of this. But look at what life is showing you in the world, and you will see that none of this is so far away. It's exactly happening in front of us. Only we don't relate it to these planes. So see the relationship when you see these world events taking place around you. And try and understand from which plane is impacting those beings on that or that state. Because they are obviously very open to this plane of falsehood and night. These are kind of, you see even people were putting flowers, it's all over television. And these hooded beings with black hoods, look at the way they're dressed. They come and they scoop down, pick up the flowers, catch hold of those poor human beings, drag them across the streets and take them somewhere into prisons. So, I mean, what is the difference between that and this, what we're reading? So here you have a practical example how Savitri is not just describing something that is away in some, subtle planes, but the effect of that can be seen in our planes. All those beings, all those human beings, those states, those peoples who are under that influence of falsehood, in a sense, are diluted versions of this terrible, terrible crookedness and lie that is being described here. So at least we've all been so much watching what's going on, both in Israel and Gaza and all these places, that it's almost like chapters of Savitri that one is looking at. So see the correlation in our own world. So this doesn't just become poetry and something that is far off, but something that is very close to us. So only they agree to differ in evil's path, to live in their own way for their own selves, or to enforce a common lie and wrong. Their ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him as mate and queen. So the ego, this is just to the one man who has captured power and because of his ego, wants to continue in power 23 years, wants to again rig elections for the nth time and continue. So this is ego as the lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God. Injustice justified by firm decrees. The sovereign weights of errors legalized trade. But all the weights were false and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and a sword, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. In high professions, rapt self-will walked wide, and license stalked, prating of order and right. There was no altar raised to liberty. True freedom was abhorred and hunted down. Harmony and tolerance nowhere could be seen. Each group proclaimed its dire and naked law, a frame of ethics knobbed with scriptural rules, or a theory passionately believed and praised, a table seemed of high heaven's sacred code. A formal practice, mailed and iron shod, gave to a rude and ruthless warrior kind, drawn from the savage bowels of the earth, a proud, stern poise of harsh nobility, a civic posture, rigid and formidable. But all their private acts belied the pose. Power and utility were their truth and right. An eagle rapacity clawed its coveted good. Beak, specked, and talons tore all weaker prey. In their sweet secrecy of pleasant sins, nature they obeyed and not a moralist God. Inconscient traders in bundles of contraries, they did what in others they would persecute. When their eyes looked upon their fellows' vice, an indignation flamed of virtuous wrath. Oblivious of their own deep-hid offense, mob-like they stoned a neighbor caught in sin. A pragmatist judge within passed false decrees, posed worst iniquities on equity's base, reasoned ill actions just, sanctioned the scale of the merchant's ego's interest and desire. Thus was a balance kept. the world could live. A zealot fervour pushed their ruthless cults. All faith not theirs bled scourged as heresy. They questioned, captived, tortured, burned or smote, and forced the soul to abandon right or die. Amid her clashing creeds and warring sects, religion sat upon a blood-stained throne. 100 tyrannies oppressed and slew, and founded unity upon fraud and force. Only what seemed was prized as real there. The ideal was a cynic ridicule's butt, hooted by the crowd, mocked by enlightened wits. Spiritual seeking wandered outcasted, a dreamer's self-deceiving web of thought, or mad chimera deemed, or hypocrite's fake. Its passionate instinct trailed through minds obscure, lost in the circuits of the ignorance. A lie was there the truth, and truth a lie. Here must the traveller of the upward way, for daring hell's kingdoms winds the heavenly route, pause or pass slowly through that perilous space. So, in this space, this plane, where he sees this stifled world of total darkness and falsehood and error and conscious deceit and willful falsehood and lies, he says, a lie was there, the truth, and truth a lie. Here must the traveller of the upward way, anyone who wants to travel towards the higher regions, they have to pass through this route. They have to go through this plane of night. The only way they can go through it is pause or pass slowly through that perilous space. The only way to protect oneself in this plane is a prayer upon his lips and the great name. So this is the protection that one needs. Or only was safe who had God in their hearts. So these are, great mantras of protection and that Sri Aurobindo scatters in Savitri. Even for ourselves, at every moment we are in dangerous spaces. Sometimes in our own sleep, sometimes in waking, sometimes circumstances. So how do you protect yourself from these dangers? So here is the clue. Whether you are traveling in consciousness from one plane to another, or you're traveling in the physical world from one place to another, or you're with people who you don't know, or you're in unknown places, unknown trains, unknown planes. You see when you read the news, what this world is, what is happening. How do you protect yourself? How do you remain safe? So this is what he is here saying. So there is the clue. For daring hell's kingdoms winds the heavenly route, pause or pass slowly through that perilous space, a prayer upon his lips and the great name. It probed not all discernment's keen spear point. If probed not all discernment's keen spear point, he might stumble into falsity's endless net. Over his shoulder, often he must look back, like one who feels on his neck an enemy's breath. Else stealing up behind a treasonous blow might prostrate caste and pin to unholy soil, pierced through his back by evil's poignant stake. So when one is traveling in these kinds of areas of night, whether in one's sleep, in dreams, or in waking, these are things you have to be careful about. Keep the Divine's name, have the prayer, and keep very, very vigilant. So might one fall on the Eternal's road, forfeiting the Spirit's lonely chance in time, and no news of him reach the waiting gods. marked missing in the register of souls. So might one fall on the Eternal's road when one is moving forward, those with an aspiration to progress and to move and to realize the soul and to greaten the spirit, so might one fall on the Eternal's road, forfeiting the spirit's lonely chance in time, and no news of him reach the waiting gods, marked missing in the register of souls. His name, the index of a failing hope, the position of a dead remembered star. Only were safe who kept God in their hearts. Courage their armor, faith their sword, they must walk, the hand ready to smite, the eye to scout, casting a javelin regard in front, heroes and soldiers of the army of light. Wonderful, wonderful mantric words of Sri Aurobindo. Very, very pertinent. And, for us today, he gives the clue how to live in this world and how to travel in all worlds, the darkest and the densest and the most ignorant to the most evil. Only were safe who kept God in their hearts, courage their armor, faith their sword. So the importance of faith. Faith is the sword. The sword is not the faith. So he's not talking about a physical. You're not walking around with a physical sword. Okay? Understand the difference. But you can see the power of that sword, which is faith. That absolute faith. And you see in ourselves, when we start losing faith in ourselves, or in life, or in circumstances, or even in our thoughts, that is when the evil and the treachery come in and we start going down. So the importance of faith, courage their armor, faith their sword, they must walk, the hand ready to smite, the eye to scout, casting a javelin regard in front. Javelin means something that goes in front by distance. So casting a javelin regard in front, heroes and soldiers of the army of light. Hardly even so the grisly danger past, released into a calmer, purer air, they dared at length to breathe and smile once more. Once more they moved beneath a real sun. As this happened, as when these beings that were passing through this plane of night, hardly they were able to get past this terrible danger, and then soon they were able to breathe and smile once more, because they had courage, they had faith, and they had the prayer. So through once more they moved beneath a real sun. Though hell claimed rule, the spirit still had power. This no man's land he passed without debate. So that's how Ashwapati was given safe passage through this no man's land. Because of this, the power of the spirit and his faith. So this no man's land he passed without debate. Him the heights missioned, him the abyss desired. So him the heights missioned, him the abyss desired. This pull, the gravitational pull down and the aspirational pull up. Him the heights missioned, him the abyss desired. None stood across his way, no voice forbade. For swift and easy is the downward path. And now towards the night was turned his face. So he passes through this, but he is continuing in his journey downward. Because here Ashwapati is exploring and trying to understand what are these different worlds and planes and kingdoms of darkness that exist, and what is the source of the world's deepest misery and evil and crookedness and ignorance. Where does it come from? So he said, as nobody's easiest path is going down. Nobody stops you. You go very easily down. Even in our own thoughts, you see. Even in our own actions, you see. If you want to follow something that you know is not right, it's very easy to go there and nobody stops you. But if you want to follow something that is difficult and that is right you have to go up, and it's very difficult to move up. So that's why he says that Ashwapati had passed through this plane, but as he was going down, nobody stood in his way, nobody forbade him and said, no, stop, you can't go down, you can't go further into the darkness. They all wanted him to go there. So they all got out of his way so that he could go further down. They don't know who Ashwapati is. He was a great spiritual being, and he would not be. And they were hoping that the night would catch him. So they were getting out of his way so that he could move further down into the descent into night. So none stood across his way, no voice forbade him. For swift and easy is the downward path, and now towards the night was turned his face. So even for ourselves, whenever we have a choice, it's always easier to take the downward path. In everything, the choice is always there. A greater darkness waited, a worse reign. So even a greater darkness than what we have read now awaited Ashwapati, and a worse reign. If worse can be where all evil's extremes, yet to the cloaked, the uncloaked is naked worst. There God in truth and the supernal light had never been, or else had power no more. So this is the plane that Ashwapati is now entering, a plane where it's the worst, most evil's extreme, and God, truth and light had never been, or else had power no more. As when one slips in a deep moment's trance over mind's border into another world, he crossed a boundary whose stealthy trace I could not see, but only the soul feel. So he crossed a boundary whose stealthy trace I could not see, but only the soul feel. Into an armored fierce domain he came, and saw himself wandering like a lost soul. So he sees himself like a witness self, wandering like a lost soul amid grimed walls and savage slums of night. Around him crowded, grey and squalid huts, neighbouring proud palaces of perverted power, inhuman quarters and demoniac wards. A pride in evil hugged its wretchedness. A misery-haunting splendour pressed those fell-done suburbs of the cities of dream life. Their life displayed to the spectator soul the shadow depths of her strange miracle. A strong and fallen goddess without hope. So life here displayed to the spectator soul the shadow depths of her strange miracle. And here she was the strong and fallen goddess without hope, obscured, deformed by some dire Gorgon spell, as might a harlot empress in a bouge, nude, unashamed, exulting, she upraised her evil face of perilous beauty and charm, and, drawing panic to a shuddering kiss, twixt the magnificent of her fatal breasts, allured to their abyss the spirit's fall. Across his field of sight, she multiplied as on a scenic film or moving plate. So across whose field of sight? Ashwapati's. Across his field of sight she multiplied. Life multiplied as on a scenic film or moving plate, the implacable splendor of her nightmare pomps. On the dark background of a soulless world, she staged between a lurid light and shade her dramas of the sorrow of the depths, written on the agonized nerves of living things. Epics of horror and grim majesty, wry statues spat and stiffened in life's mud. a glut of hideous forms and hideous deeds, paralyzed pity in the hardened breast. In booths of sin and night repairs of vice, styled infamies of the body's concupiscence, and sordid imaginations etched in flesh, turned lust into a decorative art, abusing nature's gift, her pervert skill, immortalize the sown grain of living death in a mud goblet poured the Bacchic wine. To a satyr gave the thyrsus of a god. What does thyrsus mean? To a satyr gave the thyrsus of a god? The staff, yeah. Of a god, impure, sadistic, with grimacing mouths. Impure, sadistic, with grimacing mouths, grey, foul inventions, gruesome and macabre, came televisioned from the gulfs of night. I'm wondering whether the television was invented when Sri Aurobindo wrote this.
Of course
It was, no? 1940, 1938. There was? When was?
They saw the Second World War. Television was there.
Yeah, so this he wrote when? Must be around that time. Or maybe he revised it at that time. I'm not sure. The written was earlier, I think. Anybody knows?
What was always there? Doordarshan.
Doordarshan, yeah. It's a television, yeah.
It's a Greek word.
It's a Greek word. So I wonder whether the actual television was invented by
Spoke
them.
about the possibilities by
I suppose so, yes. But then Sri Aurobindo could have just used it because he was so proficient in Greek. He would have, used the word. Often I've seen he's used certain words that those things weren't there. So, her craft ingenuous in monstrosity, impatient of all natural shape and poise, agape of nude exaggerated lines, gave caricature a stark reality, and art parades of weird distorted forms, and gargoyle masks obscene and terrible, trampled to tormented postures the torn sense. An inexorable evil's worshipper, she made vileness great and sublimated filth, a dragon power of reptile energies and strange epiphanies of groveling force and serpent grandeurs couching in the mire, drew adoration to a gleam of slime. All nature pulled out of her frame and base was twisted into an unnatural pose. Repulsion stimulated inert desire. Agony was made a red spiced food for bliss. Hatred was trusted with the work of lust, and torture took the form of an embrace. A ritual anguish consecrated death. Worship was offered to the undivine. A new aesthesis of Inferno's art that trained the mind to love what the soul hates, imposed allegiance on the quivering nerves, and forced the unwilling body to vibrate. So very, very interesting. You see, now we know where these things on earth come from. This is the source, the plane from which all these dark, manifestations are present, come from on earth. And we see them and we know about them. But this is their source. Worship was offered to the undivine, a new aesthesis of Inferno's art that trained the mind to love what the soul hates, imposed allegiance on the quivering nerves, and forced the unwilling body to vibrate, too sweet and too harmonious to excite, in this regime that soiled the being's core. Beauty was banned, the heart's feeling dulled to sleep, and cherished in their place sensation's thrills. The world was probed for jets of sense appeal. Here cold material intellect was the judge and needed sensual prick and jog and lash, that its hard dryness and dead nerves might feel some passion and power, an acrid point of life. A new philosophy theorized evil's rights, gloried in the shimmering rot of decadence, or gave to a python force persuasive speech, and armed with knowledge the primeval brute. Over life and matter only brooding bowed, mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. It scrambled into the pit to dig for truth, and lighted its search with the subconscious flares. Thence bubbling rose, sullying the upper air, the filth and festering secrets of the abyss. This it called positive fact and real life. So this is called positive fact and real life. Mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. And where did it go? It dug deep and went into the pit to dig for truth and lighted its search with the subconscious flares. Thence bubbling rose, sullying the upper air, the filth and festering secrets of the abyss. This it called positive fact and real life. This now composed the fetid atmosphere. A wild beast's passion crept from secret night to watch its prey with fascinating eyes. Around him like a fire, with sputtering tongues, there lolled and laughed a bestial ecstasy. The air was packed with longings brute and fierce, crowding and stinging in a monstrous swarm, pressed with a noxious hum into his mind thoughts that could poison nature's heavenliest breath. Forcing reluctant lids, assailed the sight, acts that revealed the mystery of hell. All that was there was on this pattern made. A race possessed inhabited those parts, a force demoniac lurking in man's depths that heaves suppressed by the heart's human law, awed by the calm and sovereign eyes of thought, can in a fire and earthquake of the soul arise and, calling to its native night, overthrow the reason, occupy the life, and stamp its hoof on nature's shaking ground. This was for them their being's flaming core, a mighty energy, a monster god. Hard to the strong, implacable to the weak, it stared at the harsh, unpitying world it made with the stony eyelids of its fixed idea. Its heart was drunk with the dire hunger's wine. In others' suffering felt a thrilled delight, and of death and ruin the grandiose music heard. To have power, to be master, was sole virtue and good. It claimed the whole world for evil's living room. Its party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. But, it's very important to see how in this plane, when Ashwapati has gone down into the darkest night, and there he sees where the origin of evil, the origin of sin, of evil, of monstrosity, of darkness lies. Here you see again this one line, how he ties it into a race possessed inhabited those parts, a force demoniac lurking in man's depths. So this force that he sees here is lurking in man's depths. So it's not something that he sees in some nether plane of consciousness which is only in that hell-driven descent into night. He sees this force lurking in man's depths. And that is where the correlation with us comes on this path or in this yoga. That this force is lurking in humanity's depth, that is in each one of us. And therefore one has to become conscious of it. And that is why the mother said to be very careful about what you watch, what you read, what you see, because you are then opening yourself to those forces. And therefore one has to be very vigilant in a self-discipline and a certain regulatory, a higher psychic that guides one in every moment of one's life, in one's own decisions, in one's own in our feelings, emotions, thoughts, because it's so easy to take the downward path, as Ashwapati notes. It's very easy to slide down. And these powers are waiting in each of us, and therefore you see these pockets in the world where these powers are concentrated. And you see, this wonderful line here, it reminds you of what just all of us witnessed with Vladimir Putin and that man that he just killed. It claimed the whole world for evil's living room, its party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. See, these are not just poetry or just something that is, esoteric. It's right down. You see all the strains of it in the world, in ourselves, in politics, and in every part of the world. So this is the wonder of Savitri. A mighty energy, a monster god, hard to the strong, implacable to the weak, it stared at the harsh, unpitying world it made, with the stony eyelids of its fixed idea. Its heart was drunk with the dire hunger's wine. In others' suffering felt a thrilled delight, and of death and ruin the grandiose music heard. To have power, to be master, was sole virtue and good. So the sole virtue and good of this realm was to have power and be the master. It claimed the whole world for evil's living room, its party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. All on one plan was shaped and standardized under a dark dictatorship's breathless weight. So this power that claimed the whole world for evil's living room was shaped under one party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. I think obviously very clear reference to Hitler and his realm, the cruel destiny of breathing things. All on one plan was shaped and standardized under a dark dictatorship's breathless weight, in street and house, in councils and in courts. Beings he met who looked like living men and climbed in speech upon high wings of thought, but harbored all that is subhuman, vile. So in every street and house, in councils and courts, the men looked like living men and with high words of thought and speech, but harbored all that is subhuman, vile, and lower than the lowest reptile's crawl. The reason meant for nearness to the gods, an uplift to heavenly scale by the touch of mind, only enhanced by its enlightening ray, the inborn nature's wry monstrosity. So this reason that was meant to be used to become closer to the gods was used instead to uplift to a heavenly scale the inborn nature's wry monstrosity. How could one become more and more monstrous? Often a familiar visage studying joyfully encountered at some dangerous turn, hoping to recognize a look of light, his vision warned by the spirit's inward eye, discovered suddenly hell's trademark there, or saw with the inner sense that cannot err, in the semblance of a fair or virile form, the demon and the goblin and the ghoul. An insolence reigned of cold, stone-hearted strength, mighty, obeyed, approved by the Titan's law, the huge laughter of a giant cruelty, and fierce glad deeds of ogre violence. So here again this terrible description of this world of night that Ashwapati is now treading, and of course these demoniac dark powers govern humanity. And you can see in certain parts of the world and in certain times and reigns, they become very, very visible. So here you can see how, presently the Russian totalitarian reign is creating this kind of a darkness. So did Hitler's reign. So an insolence reigned of cold, stone-hearted strength. Mighty obeyed, approved by the Titan's law, the huge laughter of a giant cruelty, and fierce glad deeds of ogre violence. In that wide cynic den of thinking beasts, one looked in vain for a trace of pity or love. There was no touch of sweetness anywhere, but only force and its acolytes, greed and hate. So only force was visible, no touch of pity or love. There was no touch of sweetness anywhere, but only force and its acolytes, its two handmaids, greed and hate. There was no help for suffering, none to save. None dared resist or speak a noble word. Armed with the aegis of tyrannic power, signing the edicts of her dreadful rule, and using blood and torture as a seal, darkness proclaimed her slogans to the world. A servile, blinkered silence hushed the mind, or only it repeated lessons taught, while mitred, holding the good shepherd's staff, falsehood enthroned on awed and prostrate hearts the cults and creeds that organize living death. So, while mitred, holding the good shepherd's staff, falsehood enthroned on awed and prostrate hearts, the cults and creeds that organize living deaths, the cults and creeds that organize living death and slay the soul on the altar of a lie. The wonderful description here, very, very reminiscent of the torture camps and the living death that was during the World War. All were deceived or served their own deceit. Truth in that stifling atmosphere could not live. Their wretchedness believed in its own joy, and fear and weakness hugged their abject depths. All that is low and sordid-thoughted, base, all that is drab and poor and miserable, breathed in a lax content its natural air, and felt no yearning of divine release. Arrogant, gibing at more luminous states, the people of the gulfs despised the sun. A barriered autarky excluded light, fixed in its will to be its own grey self. It wanted its norm unique and splendid type. It soothed its hunger with a plunderer's dream, flaunting its cross of servitude like a crown. It clung to its dismal, harsh autonomy. A bull throat bellowed with its brazen tongue, its hard and shameless clamor, filling space and threatening all who dared to listen to truths, claimed the monopoly of the battered ear. A deafened acquiescence gave its vote, and braggart dogmas shouted in the night, kept for the fallen soul, once deemed a god, the pride of its abysmal absolute. A lone discoverer in these menacing realms, guarded like termite cities from the sun, oppressed mid crowd and tramp and noise and flare, passing from dusk to deeper dangerous dusk, he wrestled with powers that snatched from mind its light and smote from him their clinging influences. So A lone discoverer in those menacing realms Ashwapati was traveling in, and these menacing realms were guarded like termite cities from the sun, guarded from the light, oppressed, passing from dusk to deeper dangerous dusk. He wrestled. Who wrestled? Ashwapati wrestled with powers that snatched from mind its light and smote from him their clinging influence. Soon he emerged. Now, again he emerges further. Soon he emerged in a dim, wall-less space. For now the peopled tracks were left behind. So he left this tract where he just had come through, which was a peopled track of a race possessed by a demoniac power, and he enters into a dim, wall-less, without any walls, space. For now the peopled tracks were left behind. He walked between wide banks of falling eve. Around him grew a gaunt spiritual blank. So he walked between wide banks of failing eve. Around him grew a gaunt spiritual blank, a threatening waste, a sinister loneliness that left mind bare to an unseen assault. So in this failing evening, around him grew a gaunt, a completely spiritual blank, a threatening waste, a sinister loneliness that left mind bare to an unseen assault, an empty page on which all that willed could write stark, monstrous messages without control. A travelling dot on downward roads of dusk, mid barren fields and barns and straggling huts, and a few crooked and phantasmal trees, he faced a sense of death and conscious void. But still, a hostile life unseen was there, whose death-like poise, resisting light and truth, made living a bleak gap in nullity, zeroness. He heard the grisly voices that deny, assailed by thoughts that swarmed like spectral hordes, a prey to the staring phantoms of the gloom, and terror approaching with its lethal mouth, driven by a strange will, down, ever down. The sky above, a communique of doom. He strove to shield his spirit from despair, but felt the horror of the growing night and the abyss rising to claim his soul. Then seized the abodes of creatures and their forms, and solitude wrapped him in its voiceless folds. All vanished suddenly, like a thought expunged. His spirit became an empty listening gulf, void of the dead illusion of a world. Nothing was left, not even an evil face. He was alone with the grey python night, a dense and nameless nothingness, conscious, mute, which seemed alive but without body or mind, lusted all beings to annihilate, that it might be forever nude in soul, as in a shapeless beast's intangible jaws, gripped, strangled by that lusting, vicious plot, attracted to some black and giant mouth, and swallowing throat, and a huge belly of doom. His being from its own vision disappeared, drawn towards depths that hungered for its fall. So the being from his own vision disappeared, drawn towards depths that hungered for its fall. Here again, Ashwapati, this is the third realm of darkness where there is nothing, no people, nothing but this dark night that envelops him in this evil face. Not even an evil face left. There was just this grey python night alone, a dense and nameless nothing, which seemed alive but without body or mind, lusted all beings to annihilate, place of total annihilation, that it might be forever nude in soul. as in a shapeless beast's intangible jaws, gripped, strangled by that lusting vicious blot, attracted to some black and giant mouth, and swallowing throat in a huge belly of doom, his being from its own vision disappeared, drawn towards depths that hungered for its fall. A formless void oppressed his struggling brain. A darkness grim and cold benumbed his flesh. A whispered grey suggestion chilled his heart, hailed by a serpent's force from its warm home and dragged to extinction in bleak vacancy. Life clung to its seat with cords of gasping breath. Lapped was his body by a tenebrous tongue. Existence smothered, travailed to survive. Hope strangled, perished in his empty soul. Belief and memory abolished, died, and all that helps the spirit in its course. There crawled through every tense and aching nerve, leaving behind its poignant quaking trail, a nameless and unutterable fear. So here there crawled through every tense and aching nerve, leaving behind its poignant quaking trail, a nameless and unutterable fear, as a scene nears a victim bound and still. The approach alarmed his mind forever dumb, of an implacable eternity, of pain inhuman and intolerable. So Ashwapati's mind was alarmed by this approach of an implacable eternity of pain, inhuman and intolerable. This he must bear. His hope of heaven estranged. He must ever exist without extinction's peace, in a slow suffering time and tortured space, an anguished nothingness, his endless state. A lifeless vacancy was now his breast, and in the place where once was luminous thought, only remained, like a pale, motionless ghost, an incapacity for faith and hope, and the dread conviction of a vanquished soul, immortal still, but with its Godhead lost, self lost, and God in touch of happier worlds. But he endured, stilled the vain terror. But Ashwapati endured in this flame. He quietly endured all this terrible, terrible suffering and pain and intolerable pain, and he bore it all, self-lost and God in touch of happier worlds. But he endured, stilled the vain terror, bore the smothering coils of agony and affright. So in this whole plane, Ashwapati that is able to endure and suffers through the most intolerable pain and agony, until then peace returned and the soul's sovereign gaze. But only due to this his incredible endurance and of this pain and having to stay in this plane until peace returned, then peace returned and the soul's sovereign gaze. To the blank horror, a calm light replied. Immutable, undying and unborn, mighty and mute, the Godhead in him woke, and faced the pain and danger of the world. Mighty and mute, the Godhead in Ashwapati woke, and faced the pain and danger of the world. He mastered the tides of nature with a look. He met with his bare spirit naked hell. End of Canto 7. So this is the end of Canto 7, the descent into night. Canto 8 is the world of falsehood, the mother of evil. and the sons of darkness.